I would always stick around after that one because then I kind of began my tour of going to festivals in various countries and across the US. And I'd always stick around for the opening because I was always curious to see what audience reaction. It's got a pretty, it's a pretty
Exactly.
impactful opening for some people, So it was interesting to see the different reactions in different countries, different cultures, and things like that. And that kind of was motivated by that screening where I was sitting pretty close to the aisle so I could get in and out quickly. Amongst a couple of walkouts that we had during that first 5 minutes, one person walked by me, and I don't know if they knew I was sitting there, but I heard them under their breath say, "It's fucking bullshit," and then walked out. And it was just like, oh, okay. When it's your own movie, it feels a
Right.
little different when people are walking out.
Welcome to the That Screening Podcast. Established nearly 5 decades ago, the Toronto International Film Festival, or TIFF, is an epic event that has lived up to its name as one of the premier genre experiences globally. During near 2 weeks, some of the best films come to Toronto to amaze festival goers, insiders, press, fans, and more, including the infamous Midnight Madness screenings and formerly the Vanguard section. TIFF can launch a career and can also be a cautionary tale in the case of our guest on this episode of the That Screening Podcast. World premiering his feature PROXY back in 2013, Zack Parker is a revolutionary creator who understands storytelling and the power to manipulate the human condition through genre elements, defined characters, and palpable tension. Telling the story of a pregnant woman who is attacked and then taken in by a sinister support group, Zack talks about the life-changing screening of PROXY back at TIFF in 2013 on this episode of That Screening. We welcome to the That Screening Podcast, filmmaker Zack Parker. Zack, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you for jumping on this episode. We appreciate it so much. So let's jump into this with the That Screening Podcast.
You bet.
All these different episodes, we've talked about a range of screenings that have lasted, whether we're fans, filmmakers, peers, whatever it may end up being, journalists, whatever it may end up being. And it's personal cinema to us. So for you, in this case, what's a screening that's lasted with you?
Kind of undeniably, probably one of the most impactful screenings of my life is the world premiere of my film PROXY at the Toronto International Film Festival.
Now we're going back 2013, correct?
That's right, 2013.
2013. So it's a little shade for both of us over
That's
the
right.
years. It's, but you're the first one to talk about a TIFF screening. We've talked Fantasia, Fantastic Fest, Brooklyn Horror. A lot of them have been horror based. You go ahead, you get there. What's the feeling like?
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's one of the biggest festivals in the world. As a filmmaker, like that's, especially as an independent filmmaker, a guy who comes from Indiana who's got no connection to Hollywood or filmmaking ever, the dream. You're there with quote unquote real movies and real movie makers. Name me a filmmaker who feels like they're a real filmmaker. No, I mean, all of our own movies feel like we're faking and everything else is real. It was a surrealistic experience of being there with these films, some films that would go on to, Academy Award nominations,
Right.
and Academy Award wins. It's insane to think about.
The atmosphere there is very different than most festivals. It's really kind of its own entity. I had the opportunity pre-pandemic to go a couple of times for different screenings, and it's definitely a festival that can be overwhelming. How is it different from other festivals that you were at? If you could just kind of quantify it.
I would say there was more of a presence of the business there than I'd seen at other festivals, especially as a filmmaker. I had been to Sundance 2 times, once as a projectionist, and once I had a short film playing at the Slam Dunk Film Festival. And this was in 2000. So I was definitely on the outside of that circle, seeing all these things, running into Roger Ebert at a restaurant, and begging him to come see my film, which he obviously did not do. He was not there to see movies at Slam Dunk. He was there to see movies at Sundance. but this was the first time I felt like on some level inside of that circle, you know, like this was the first time I was at a festival. Again, this is my fourth feature, so I played quite a few festivals of you know various, very extreme, various sizes. But this was the first where we had press and industry screenings. This is a film festival where I had to have a sales rep, I had to have a publicist, you know, like all of these things. I had to prepare, get poster designs for you know Deadline and Hollywood Reporter, you know, like announcements and you know kind of teaser to you know to be released ahead of time to try to attract distributors and buyers into our screenings and things like that. That was my first exposure to anything like that.
How did you find out that you were going to be part of TIFF?
It was a long process. I'd met Adam Wingard when I was going around with my second movie, and he was going around with his second movie, Pop Skull, and with my film Quench. And we became friends and started sort of like swapping films with each other. Through Adam, I met Joe Swanberg. And so when I was writing Proxy, I thought Joe would be a really good fit for that. And Adam had like, you know, it sort of told me that Joe had opened up some doors for him too, you know, since Joe had been working and really building a really strong body of work at that point. So Joe was super cool. I emailed him the script. He got right back to me. He said, yeah, man. So then cut to later on when we're in post-production and we were talking one day. He's like, well, what are you thinking about? You know, where are you hoping to take this? My dream would be to like premiere it at the Vanguard section of TIFF. And he's like, oh, well, do you know Colin Geddes? And like, I did not, but
Yes.
Colin was the programmer for Midnight Madness and Vanguard at the time. I could get a screener to him. And that was the big change, you know. Like, of course, I had submitted other films to TIFF before and Sundance and you know and all the others, and but didn't know anybody. So, and of course, like having that connection was not going to guarantee acceptance to that festival. But what it did teach me was that what it did guarantee is actual consideration, and that's what you don't get when you're cold. You know what is now what Film Freeway. You know, like
Right.
you're submitting cold, you're not getting it to the people that are actually making the decisions. You know, you have to have some sort of connection to these people who are actually making these decisions at these larger scale festivals. And that's what it taught me. Because Colin even confided in me later and said, like, why didn't you send your last film to me? And I'm like, well, I submitted it, you know, on whatever it was. He's like, yeah, I never got it. If I would have got it, I would have programmed it. Great.
Well, you got there. This screening was huge. Who came with you to the screening? Because it's a very eclectic cast, a lot of very talented people behind the
Yeah.
scenes. Talk about that.
Most of our main cast was there. Joe was there. Alexia Rasmussen was there. Alexa Havens could not make it, I believe. Christina Cleve was there. My DP went. My composers, you know, the brilliant, the Newton brothers, who have now gone on to much acclaim. You know, I think they're scoring Daredevil right now, and they've
Right.
done like most of Flanagan's films. In fact, we kind of piggybacked off Flanagan's orchestra in Macedonia that he had used for Oculus. And so we got them one extra day to record our entire score for Proxy. So because the Newton Brothers were already working on that film as well. So I know they were there, and then like various cast crew members, a few supporting, and then like filmmaker friends were showing up, which was amazing. So Joe was there, and Ty West was there with because he was there with Sacrament already, and I had been friends with Jeremy Saulnier and Macon Blair for a few years at that point, so they came to our screening, and it was amazing.
It's
Yeah.
like an all-star list of names. So many respected filmmakers. The buzz going into it, did you hear about how people were perceiving your film before the screening?
I was hearing from our reps that distributors were really intrigued by the teaser I had cut together, so that we were in a good place. People were going to show up for our press and industry screenings. For those who don't know, those are screenings that are specifically for critics and buyers, potential buyers. So we had one of those, I believe it was a day or two before our actual world premiere. And we started getting offers to buy the film right after that screening. And we had a few competing bids. So we actually were in a really nice position where we got to kind of choose who to go with. And I'd already kind of was thinking IFC was sort of a dream fit for this film. So I was happy
Right.
to see that they were in the running. Sold the film before we even had the world premiere. So that kind of took a lot of the pressure off of the premiere too, to know that we already were going to have a good home before like it was open to sort of like a public screening.
How was the atmosphere when you walked into that theater?
It was great. I mean, again, it's a gigantic theater. We're at
Yes.
the Bloors Theater. I think it's like 1,500 people. I mean, insane. The biggest audience I'd ever played something in front of, and had to get up and introduce the film. Had to do a Q&A. It's all a blur. I don't remember any of it. There's a great picture of like me with the entire team on the screen on the stage after the screening. thing for me. Like I would always it's hard for me to sit in a theater and watch one of my own films, but I would always stick around after that one because then I kind of began my tour of going to festivals in various countries and across the U.S. And I'd always stick around for the opening because I was always curious to see what audience reaction. It's got a pretty, it's a pretty
Exactly.
impactful opening for some people, So it was interesting to see the different reactions in different countries, different cultures, and things like that. And that kind of was motivated by that screening where I was sitting pretty close to the aisle so I could get in and out quickly. Amongst a couple of walkouts that we had during that first 5 minutes, one person walked by me, and I don't know if they knew I was sitting there, but I heard them under their breath say, "It's fucking bullshit," and then walked out. And it was just like, oh, okay. When it's your own movie, it feels a
Right.
little different when people are walking out. Me being a fan of films that kind of try to push the envelope and directors who try to work with really difficult subject matter, when I would go see screenings of, say, A Clockwork Orange, and I'd see people walking out like, it's like, yeah, you can't handle it, like this film's too intense for you. When it's your own movie, it feels a
Right.
little different when people are walking out. That was a kind of a part of the roller coaster of emotions that night. Yeah.
You say it's a blur for you with the Q&A. Do you remember it all? Did you get a lot of questions pertaining to the film, or was it more of a crowd that was more pensive and just listened and
There was
observed?
a lot of questions. There was a lot of questions about the structure of it, about the sense of misdirection, which were all things that were very deliberate in the making of it. That was part of what interested me in writing that script, along with my writing partner Kevin Donners. We kept talking about, like, if you're a savvy film watcher or somebody who watches a lot of films, you catch on pretty quickly to different cues, different tropes, And what was becoming more and more dissatisfying to me watching films was that I could pretty much in the first 5 minutes kind of guess
Right.
everything that was going to happen. So it's like, how do we use that against the audience? Let's start setting up these scenarios where you think you're going down one path, and then it's like an abrupt turn, and then another, and then you think you have a handle on it, it's another abrupt turn. And so it was nice. That was the first time I really got to see that an audience was picking up on that, and that people were expressing that that was part of what they enjoyed about the most, is that they never knew where it was going. And so I remember that.
What's an emotion or word stepping onto that TIFF stage for the first time like that for you?
I would say surreal.
Surreal. I have no doubt
Yeah.
with it.
Even though to this day I know it happened, it still feels like it's a thing that I dreamt and that wasn't actually reality.
Did this screening change you? Because I mean, you're looking at everything from Glasgow Fright Fest to Sitges across the board.
Mhm.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
places, even Lincoln Center,
Yeah.
Fantastic Fest. Was this a screening that taught you anything, changed you
It
at
did.
all versus the
It,
others?
it did. It got me a legitimate manager. It got me a legitimate agent. It definitely, I think, changed the perception of me as a filmmaker and legitimized me in a lot of circles. But then it was my first access to what Hollywood and studios were kind of like, the introduction of like what it could be like to work in that system, and having an agent, and how really an agent is there to like send you scripts of things that are already put together and hope to get you hired on to do those things, which was never a thing I was interested in. I feel like I was not a very good client because I was only interested in still making my own things, and I had a script already, and hey, like, this is a little bit bigger budget but still not insane, trying to cast that. And then as I took that around to more places, it was all these people kind of like passing on it. And it's like, what's going on? Like, I'm hearing that, like, we don't really understand. It doesn't fit into a particular genre. And it's really weird structurally. And so we're afraid it's going to alienate audiences. I'm like, yeah, but like everything that people are saying are loving about my other film, you're saying is all these things that are negatives. And I finally had one executive kind of like be honest with me and said, like, yeah, but we didn't pay for that. And so it's different when it's done and people are seeing it and liking it, and to get on board with something, maybe trying to do something a little new. It's very different when it's on the ground level, when you're coming in at the beginning, and taking that risk with you. And so that was a little disheartening and made me kind of like second guess, how is it that I want to do this and navigate. That then led to me kind of taking a hiatus from things for a while because I just didn't like what I was getting cornered into.
You're one of several that have fallen into that category. I always think of
Yeah.
Lucky McKee as another one.
Tremendous guy, incredibly talented filmmaker. He was like a really nice champion of mine too. Like, again, and he really helped me out with the script I was doing too, that I almost again got made, and then it just didn't happen. So then my kids were getting older, and I need to have this time with them. Now my kids have gotten older, and it's like, okay, now I'm kind of more in a position where I can start. So over the last like 2 or 3 years, I've really been getting back into it again, kind of set to make finally like my next feature, looking to shoot later this year. So I'm very excited about that in a whole different way. as you know, have gotten really down the 16 millimeter rabbit
Right.
hole.
With all the pomp and circumstance, Zach, of TIFF,
Mhm.
was that the right festival to world premiere Proxy?
Absolutely. No doubt in
Why?
my mind. I think especially because in the Vanguard section of it, which I think no longer exists, it was sort of that indefinable genre where it's not quite horror, it's not quite just straight drama, it's obviously not comedy, but it lives somewhere in between. And Vanguard was perfect for that. We're sort of like it was a section for sort of the indefinable. And I think that Proxy is kind of indefinable when it comes to genre. So I think it was really perfect. And it set the stage for it. And like when you have a film premiere at TIFF, like people pay attention. That was my first introduction to getting invited to festivals. Of all the festivals that Proxy played at, I
Right.
submitted to one, and that was TIFF. Every place else I got invited to.
Through the entire time at TIFF, was there anything else that stands out to you? Press outing, people you talked about, some of the people you met before along the way, before the screening. Anything else that stood out?
I would say like just again one of those surreal moments was we had like some photo shoots. You know, you kind of go in and do these a little bit of a photo spread, and you do like a little Q&A or some interviews. I guess what you would call sort of a junket scenario. And the team that was in right before us, so we were waiting for them to leave the space before we went in there, was the team from Gravity. So you've got Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, and it was just like, where are we? You know, so like we're next. Is there a mistake? You know, like what's happening? So I think that's always a moment that's really like stuck with me too.
One other thing, and we haven't had a whole lot of filmmakers on the episodes yet, but the projection, the sound, what was that experience like for you as a filmmaker to see your film up on that screen and hear it in that theater?
I mean, it was amazing. Feels like a bit of a blur. You always sit there terrified of your screening and your DCP. I've definitely had really bad experiences at festivals where like, something goes wrong with a print or something goes wrong with a DVD or or a Blu-ray or then later a DCP. But it was clean. It's looked and sounded better in that theater than I think any place else I've still ever seen it to this date. And just to feel the energy in that room and an audience responding, incredible experience.
Was there a moment that hit that you wanted to hit, or a moment that surprised you? Because you talk about the first opening 5 minutes.
For me, like again, because I don't make a jump scare kind of film. And so like I'm looking at the back of people's heads. The difficult thing about making a film like this, where you're looking at the back of people's heads, is like whether they are bored to tears or thoroughly engaged, the back of their heads look exactly the same. I could not get a sense of how the audience was receiving the film. That puts you in a lot of turmoil in that seat because all you're seeing is all of the mistakes and everything you could have done differently. And just like, oh my gosh, like this thing is completely incoherent. Nobody's following it. Like everybody's frustrated. Everybody wants to walk out of here. So then afterwards, when I got to have the Q&A and then just audience members coming up to me and sort of like, giving me their thoughts and telling me how much they enjoyed it, like then it's a bit of a relief until the next screening. And then you have the same experience all over again.
Was this a top 5 screening overall for you as a filmmaker?
I would say it's absolutely of all time as a filmmaker. Yes.
Final question, Zack Parker. Thank you so much for being on the That Screening podcast, talking Proxy, TIFF 2013. What's one word that describes this screening of Proxy at TIFF?
I'd say culmination. I would say in that moment, it felt like the culmination of everything I've been working towards since I was 10 years old and picked up my dad's video camera and start trying to figure out what making movies was.
Thank you so much for listening to the That Screening podcast with JK, heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and more. Find That Screening podcast on social media platforms such as Instagram and Facebook, along with the official website for JK on Wix.com. Make sure to like us, share new episodes, rate us, and listen in to all the content coming from Horror Happens Radio Presents.